You know, you can trade pretty much anything these days. Oil, gold, corn, you name it. But what about the one thing we all use literally every single second? Electricity. Well, it turns out you just can't trade power like you trade corn, and the reasons why are, honestly, they're pretty fascinating.
So why is this market so incredibly complex, so notoriously volatile? I mean, how can the price of something so essential swing so wildly from one minute to the next? That's the big mystery we're going to get into right now.
Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. The entire reason this market is so weird comes down to one massive fundamental difference. You can store oil in a tank, right? Corn in a silo, gold in a vault. But electricity? Nope, it can't really be stored efficiently. It has to be produced and consumed in the exact same instant. There's no warehouse for watts.
And that one simple fact, well, it creates the central challenge for the entire system. Which brings us to our first major point. What makes electricity so uniquely difficult?
Think about it. Because you can't store it, supply has to perfectly match demand in real time, second by second. This means the entire grid, stretching all the way across the country, is one gigantic, incredibly delicate balancing act, happening 24/7.
So, who is actually managing this incredible feat? I mean, who keeps the lights on? This brings us to the mechanics of this real-time balancing act and the key players making it all happen.
All right, let's meet the folks in charge. They're called Independent System Operators, or ISOs. And really, the best way to think of an ISO is as the air traffic controller for the power grid. They're these nonprofit organizations that manage the wholesale market and, most importantly, make sure everything stays in perfect balance so the system doesn't crash.
And this isn't just one giant command center for the whole country. The U.S. power grid is actually carved up regionally and managed by 7 of these ISOs, each one handling a different part of the country. Now, to deal with all the ups and downs that come from this instant delivery system, the ISOs use a pretty clever setup. They split the trading into 2 main markets. First, you've got the day-ahead market, where most of the power for tomorrow gets scheduled and priced. But then, for all the last-minute tweaks needed to keep things balanced, you have the real-time market. Okay, this is where things can get a little complicated. But don't worry, we're going to use a really simple analogy to make it all make sense. From here on out, let's just think of the power grid as a massive highway system.
Seriously, this little mental model is the key. It's going to unlock how the most complex part of this whole thing, how they actually price the electricity, really works.
Okay, think of this as our decoder ring. The power itself, the megawatts, those are just cars on the road. The power plants generating the electricity, they're the drivers starting their trips. The grid, obviously, is the highway system. The demand for power, that's you turning on your lights, is the highway exit, the destination. And the price, well, think of that as the time it takes to get to that destination.
All right, so let's use our highway analogy to tackle the trickiest piece of the puzzle. How in the world do you price a unit of power when the cost can be different from one town to the next?
So all the ISOs use a method called Locational Marginal Pricing, or LMP. And the 2 most important words there are locational and marginal. It's basically the cost to get just 1 more megawatt of power to a very specific spot on the grid.
But that final price isn't just one number. It's actually made of 3 separate pieces. First, you have the basic energy cost, what it costs the power plant to fire up and make the power. Second, you have losses. A little bit of electricity always gets lost as heat when it travels down the power lines. And third, and this is the big one, you have the congestion cost.
So what is congestion? It's not some financial trick or anything like that. It is a physical problem. Power lines just have a max capacity, a limit to how much electricity they can carry before they literally overheat and fail. You can think of it like they have a speed limit.
And in our highway analogy, it's dead simple. Congestion on the power grid is just a traffic jam. That's it.
So here's why that matters. If the cheapest power plant, our closest driver, can't get its electricity to you because there's a traffic jam on the power lines, the ISO has to call someone else. They have to dispatch a different, more expensive power plant that has a clear path to you. And that extra cost, that's the congestion cost that can make your electricity bill higher. And it's why there's such a huge push to build more transmission lines, basically to add more lanes to our highway.
Now, this whole highway system, this whole market, was designed around old-school predictable power plants. But what happens when we start adding totally new kinds of vehicles to the road, like solar and wind? This brings us to the impact of renewables.
Renewables are a total game changer, no doubt. They add more power to the grid, they cut down on the need for fossil fuels, and get this, their cost has dropped so much they are often cheaper than traditional power plants. But there's a catch, right? The sun isn't always shining, the wind isn't always blowing. That variability is forcing the whole system to adapt, leading to new things like huge grid-scale batteries, which are like reserve fuel tanks, and smarter ways to manage demand during rush hour.
And all of this leads us to the big, final question. Our electric highway was built for one kind of car. Now we have all these new types of vehicles hitting the road. So as our energy sources keep changing, how are the fundamental rules of the road going to have to adapt to keep that traffic flowing smoothly, reliably, and affordably for all of us?